Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Classic Dune. And welcome today to the strengths and strategies for the Emperor faction. Now, this is one that I was actually surprised looking at my channel I hadn't made a video on, considering they are kind of my favorite faction at this point, and they definitely represent a lot of the perspectives that I have recorded on the channel. So I almost thought I'd already made it, but I'm finally doing that now. And the Emperor is a super interesting faction. Despite the deceptively sparse faction sheet they have, they only have two abilities, and neither of them are particularly um, complicated. But I think they're some of the deepest and most impactful abilities in the game, right up there with the voice. Except maybe Sardaukar, that's pretty simple, but we'll get into it. And I think best to start off with their start position. They start with 20 forces in reserve, so none on the board at all, which can usually be a bad thing, but I think in the case of the Emperor is actually a very good thing for reasons I'll get into later. And 10 spice, which is the, except for Chom and Moritani, basically the best you can expect for a faction. Moritani starts with 12, and Chom was probably going to get 12 or 14, depending on if BG are in the game. And they have basically one of the strongest abilities right up there with voice in their bidding advantage, which is that whenever somebody bids on a treachery card and wins it, they pay the spice to you. Simple as. It's so simple. It's really one sentence and an extra to clarify and whatever a semicolon would be considered. It's super simple but super impactful because basically throughout the game, as Emperor, you will probably be the richest player at the table. And I think the reason why, unlike a lot of other games, that have a currency, being the richest person at the table is so different in Dune is because spice boosts your power in every phase of the game. Like the classic phrase, "Who controls the spice controls the universe." In Dune, I think it's very well captured. And as Shut Up and Sit Down says, "He who has no spice controls nothing." And that's also true. I think Dune is a game where you are uniquely very helpless if you have no money, because you literally can't play the game. In bidding, you can't buy cards, so you're not winning battles. In revival, you can't get anything more than your free revivals. In shipment and movement, you can't ship down any forces. And in the battle phase, you can't spice up your forces, so any that you do have on the board are going to be at half strength and very weak as a result. You basically do nothing without spice. Having the most spice as the Emperor means that there's no strategy that's blocked to you. You can do anything because you always have spice. And there are things that you can do because of certain abilities you may have, like, the Chom, they have different abilities for worthless cards that they can use. And they're able to buy more cards. And the BG, they can advise. But these, I think, are not as impactful as the sorts of things you can do just by having so much money as the Emperor. There's a whole host of diplomatic strategies you can employ through bribing people to be like mercenaries and be like, "I'll give you 5 spice if you go kill this person." Or just the sheer ability to decide, you know what, I'm shipping 5 Sardaukar and dialing all of them on your stronghold, and there's probably nothing you can do about it because 10 forces is, a sort of an insurmountable sledgehammer. And the fact that that's only a quarter of your reserves as the Emperor is huge because you could just keep doing it basically. Now, let me go over their other abilities before I get too in depth on why having so much spice is important. And these tie very well into being very rich. The advanced advantage is Sardaukar. You've got the 5-star troops that are worth double. And this isn't, it's not, it's easy to think of this as like, super powerful forces, but realistically, it's just super cheap forces because they cost they cost the strength of, they're revived as one force, they're shipped as one force, they're dialed as one force, everything as one force. So it means that they're cheaper. They're kind of like half price and everything. And the only exception is that I guess the only penalty is that you can only revive one per turn, always, no matter what. And also, they don't count against the Fremen. And interestingly, this is an Emperor disadvantage, you could say, not a Fremen advantage, which means that it cannot be Karamed. So Sardaukar, they're not really too much to write home about. It's mostly just cheap forces. But there is one interesting thing that they are good at, which is huge, which is that if you think of these as instead of 15 normal forces and five double strength forces, think of this as 25 forces as emperor that you have. Every other faction has only 20, but you as the emperor, you've got 25. And this is so strong that if you play into it, this is a very strong ability that doesn't really have any effect if you're not paying attention to it. This means that in games where they go on to be very attrition heavy and everyone is just kind of relying on their free revivals, you've got five extra forces that most people don't have. If let's say you kill 15 forces from every faction and they've got only five to work with, you're going to be hard pressed to influence much on the board with only five forces. But as the Emperor, if you lose 15, you still technically have 10 forces. You can do a lot with 10 forces. And in most cases, if you're doing a win attempt with an ally, it's easiest to take two strongholds, ship into Carthage and move to Siege Tabor, and you hold two strongholds. The most you can ever have to do this is 20 forces, which you can best divide as 10 in each. 10, very strong set of units. Going to be very tough to kill that. You'll probably need an Atreides or BG or just someone with a lot of money like the Guild to come and stop you. But with Emperor, because you have 25 total forces, it's more like 12.5 in each. And that might seem small, but that's basically a low strength leader that you have extra that can't be killed. Very strong bonus. And it also means that if you're playing a game with discovery tokens, the ones that are locations are very easy for you as the Emperor to hold and not be hindered by that reduction in forces because they're stuck controlling a territory that probably isn't a stronghold. I remember one of my first games playing with discovery tokens. I was so excited by them that I went and I controlled like two or three with a couple forces in them. And then I realized that I was in the position to go for a win attempt. I had the best hand, I had a great ally, but I didn't have the forces to be able to do it because they were all stuck in these discovery tokens that are dotted around the map. And because, you only have one shipment and one movement, I couldn't bring all of my forces to bear, even though there were only a few in the tanks. So as Emperor, having forces to be able to spread across the board and exert control and take strongholds and stuff like that, especially if you got those discovery token locations, super powerful ability. That is basically, it's not as strong as it reads. It's much stronger when you actually interpret what that means. Now, I know I downplayed it at the start and then I talked it up at the end, but hopefully that evens out to the pretty good ability that it actually is. Then you have their Alliance ability, which is great because you can revive 3 extra forces for a faction, and that's separate from the regular set of 3 that they can only revive per turn. And this means that as the Emperor, if somebody has a good hand or a good position or just a good set of abilities, you're not as hindered by their status of forces in the tanks. Now, this does nothing to help if they got a lot of dead leaders, and a faction with a lot of dead leaders is probably not going to win the game. But this is good for when it comes to forces, and especially considering the alliances are going to be formed in this phase, and then the revival is in this phase. It's basically, it's better than if revival phase was before alliances because you can use it the same turn you ally. And then the other really big part of this ability is you can share your great wealth with your allies, which is interpreted as you can give spice to your ally at any time for whatever reason or for no reason at all. You can just gift it. Whereas other factions are limited to supporting buying a treachery card or a shipment of forces. With this, you can give spice to your ally for anything, which means you can technically pay for their revivals, and you can also pay for their dialing, which is great because sometimes you need that. And as the richest player, it's perfect. It effectively makes your ally also the richest player, and it would be a great ability just with that. But to top it off, you can gift your ally free cards because since you collect the spice for bidding, your ally bids 5, they win the bid, you gift the spice to your ally, not supporting it, a gift, and then they use that spice to pay for the card. And because it's technically at that point their spice and not yours, it comes back to you. So as long as you have the spice to buy the card, you can give it to your ally totally for free, which means you really control the bidding phase. Um, you can't do that with other people because it would need to be a bribe, and those are collected at the end of the turn. But you can still, if the person has the money to buy the card, you can still do that. It just means that they have to wait for their money. But you can exert a lot of control on the bidding phase because of this. Now, where to start? I've said that the Emperor is a very complicated faction, and I would argue they're potentially S tier, up there with the Guild and the Bene Gesserit. And I think I've got a lot of wins with them, even ones on the channel that you can see, and maybe you can glean my strategy. Hopefully, I'll explain it in this, and I don't ramble too much. But they're very complicated because, as I said, there's no strategy that's locked off to them because of a lack of spice. And because in Dune, most of the strong abilities that dictate the strategies you can make are alliance abilities or can be used on their ally in some way, it means that as Emperor, you can ally with the BG and get voice and do all the crazy things that you could normally do with the voice as a Bene Gesserit. You can ally with the Atreides and get that prescience and also know everyone's hand. So now, not only do you know everyone's hand and know who you can beat in a battle and know which cards are good and buy them, you also have the most spice at the table. It's a dizzying number of things you can do. You can ally with the Tleilaxu and get a bunch of forces revived for very cheap. It's awesome. It's great. And it's fun to think of new strategies for them because a lot of Dune is very free form, and that's why you see a lot of different table metas and people who play the game totally different because, say their group just doesn't like doing binding deals. So it's very aggressive and fighty and the tanks fill up. Or a table where, nobody does anything unless they've gotten a promise from somebody else they're going to do something or get paid for it. And as the Emperor, you've got the most strategies available to you, which means that every Emperor kind of plays the game a little bit differently. I think maybe I will start going into the strategies that you can employ as the Emperor by describing my own strategy, which is the Broke Emperor playstyle. And not in the sense of broken as in overpowered, but broke as in you are poor. I said that as Emperor, you will probably be the richest player at the table because there's always me. I frequently do not take Chom as the Emperor because I've spent all my money, and you never want to take Chom because the 2 spice you get is not worth everyone knowing that you're poor. And it's essentially a very high risk, high reward strategy where in the first turn you buy 2 or 3 cards so you have hopefully the best hand at the table. And then in the shipment and movement phase, you go and you ship like about 5 normals and 2 Sardaukar into something like Habanya Siege, which is a hard stronghold to get into because it's far from the cities with their ornithopters and it's not close to anywhere else. And it's even the only stronghold on the board that isn't within 3 territories, aka ornithopter range of the Polar Sink. So it means that people probably aren't going to contest you for it. A, because it's the least valuable stronghold, not close to a lot of things, and B, because you've got a lot of forces there, and C, because you've got a lot of treachery cards in your hand, which is very scary to other people. And then in the next few turns, you kind of scope out who is doing well. You cherry pick your future ally by supporting them, giving them good deals and stuff like that, usually BG. And then when that, turn 3 or 4 Nexus happens, you ally with the strongest player and you win it with them. You give them the spice they need to buy good cards. You get them in a stronghold or two, you take a fourth for yourself, and boom, you've won the game. I've done that tons of times, and it's a very effective strategy. And what it really requires is somebody to kind of call your bluff and come out and attack you because, maybe you don't have a lot of spice, and maybe because you were buying those cards blindly, you don't have a very good hand. But that takes a lot of guts, and not everyone does that because in Dune, as I said, if you've got no spice, you don't control any part of the game, and lose one bad battle and you're in that position. So as the emperor, um, you're kind of a warden of the bidding phase, and the bidding phase is very important because whoever has cards uh, is able to win battles and probably win the game. It's very infrequent that you'll be able to win a game of Dune with a bad hand of cards because you can't win fights. You don't have, the weapons to kill your opponent's leader and the defenses to protect your own and whatnot. So, gonna be tough to win fights. I think I only recall like once or twice that I've won the game without winning anything. And that's usually just because I'm in such a good position that it was my ally who was easier to stop. And then they couldn't be stopped anyways. And nobody fought me, which is the reason I would have won without winning battles rather than, losing a bunch. That doesn't happen. So whoever has cards is the people who can both go for wins and stop wins. So a lot of times, if you can manipulate the board to be in a position where you have good cards, your ally has good cards, and maybe only one or two other players have good cards, then that means that you can win those fights and only one or two other people can stop you. And if they're going earlier than you in turn order, they're either forced to stronghold block or preemptively move to stop your win. And that, of course, requires the foresight to predict where you'll be going, what you'll be doing. And then that means that you get to act with knowledge of where they are, where they're weakest, easiest to beat. Or if they go after you, then you just have to hope that you've shipped in enough forces that they can't beat you. And then, you've got the cards to match your enthusiasm. But essentially, if nobody else can stop you because they don't have cards, then your win is almost de facto. And there's a lot of interesting ways that you can control who gets cards in the bidding phase. A common example that I think everyone's probably familiar with is the classic, the Fremen not buying any cards on the first turn because they start with only 3 spice. And I think it's also a great example of just how you can control the bidding phase. And that is just always bid 3 or 4 so the Fremen don't get it. And oftentimes a card will go for more than that, which means that you prevent Fremen from getting a card, but you don't actually have to spend any spice yourself, which means that it's free. And if you can prevent the Fremen from getting good cards in the first turn, that means they're going to be having a tough time collecting spice in the first turn, which kind of cascade that issue onto the next few turns. And the Fremen uniquely are in a very bad position when they don't have spice and they don't have cards. So if you can control your future opposition by making sure they're not a substantial threat in the early game, then by the time you ally, if they're hopefully still in a bad position, that's one less person you have to worry about stopping your win. And that, I think, that's generally a great thing to be able to do in Dune, but it's tough. Most factions don't have that ability. It's really only factions that have control over the entire game in some aspect, like how the Emperor has so much money, or how the Guild collects all those shipping payments and chooses when they go, or how the Atreides have all the knowledge on everyone's cards, and they can buy and sell that, not really buy, mostly sell, and distribute to people to kind of choose who fights whom. And to a later extent, later on in the game, the Tleilaxu, since they get all the spice from revivals, and they can give people leaders back for free or at a cheap cut price or make deals based on that. Emperors, I think, is by far up there with the Atreides in the sense of strength on how much power they exert over the entire game because, Atreides, you can see what cards somebody has and know maybe they don't have any good weapons or defenses. But as Emperor, if you have more spice in them and they can't buy cards, you still know that they don't have any weapons or defenses because they don't have any cards because they couldn't buy them. And another way to kind of control who has cards and whatnot is to outsource that to other people. You have to be very careful with this, but essentially you could bribe somebody, some spice, to bid on a card if they're a little bit short, or if they have like enough money to buy a card, but not enough to be like, I'm gonna have two spice at the end of this turn. I don't want to go down that low, so I'm not gonna buy this. But if the Emperor is gonna bribe me three spice, then maybe I'm more inclined to overspend a bit. Now, there is an important caveat that comes with this manipulation of the bidding phase with respect to your ally, and that is you always need to be careful how much you support them. And the obvious case is you support your ally by giving them all the spice they need, you give them cards, you pay for their shipments, and then one poorly timed Nexus, they leave you, they go with the Atreides or the Bene Gesserit or any other um, factions that have an alliance ability that's more useful to them, and then they win the game without you. And you literally paid for someone else to win and not you. And it is important because as the Emperor, the alliance ability here is I give you money and I give you forces. The moment that those two things are no longer required, and usually it's just the money part, reviving forces is nice, but if someone's about to win the game, they probably don't need that. Once they don't need that, they're going to go and get somebody with a better alliance ability to them. Now, this is a really strong alliance ability, but it's unfortunate in the fact that there are times, basically, the more you use it, the less they need it. And if you think about this, this is a pretty unique case because look at Atreides and look at BG. It's always good to know everyone's cards and get information, and it's always good to have the voice in a combat. And these are things that you will want if you're gonna win the game. There's no case where not having the voice is gonna make it easier to win the game instead of another alliance ability. It's just probably not gonna happen. But with the Emperor, there is going to be a period of time where you just really don't need that much spice. You've got plenty, you've got a full hand, you don't really have much to spend it on. And it's like, yeah, even Harkonnen having traitors might be a better alliance ability than the Emperor at that point. And there's two main things that are going to protect you from this. One is making sure you don't give your ally too much for too little. A great tip that I always implement is if I'm buying my ally cards, I gotta see the card. Just at a minimum, because this means that not only will you know what they have if they do an ally and you have to stop them, you'll also know how likely they are to not need you anymore. For example, if you support your ally and you buy them three cards and they're all good combat cards or Karamas or stuff like that, then you'll know they don't really need more cards. They've got a good hand already. They might leave you at the next Nexus if there is a better option at the table. But if they buy a bunch of cards and they're not great, then you know that they might have to get into some battles to spend their worthless cards or, use a truth trance for something not super useful so they can start bidding again and stuff like that. At that point, you might even just dump them. If you buy if you buy somebody a bunch of bad cards and then a Nexus comes up and there's a better option at the table, you might just leave them and now there's a person at the table with no good cards and they're not behind your bankroll anymore, so they might have been slacking with getting Spicer themselves. And that's effectively one less player at the table who's going to have an easier time stopping your win. And then there is one other thing that is going to help you keep your allies, and that is being the best option at the table. They're not going to leave you if there's no better option, even if it comes with a better, more useful alliance ability, and that is frequently going to come in the form of good board state. So you want to make sure that you've got good cards, you've got a good, healthy set of leaders, nobody's really died, and you've got forces on the board. Great thing about Emperor with all those those basically 5 extra forces, is you can plop down a stack of 10 forces in Siege Tabor, especially if the Fremen aren't in the game, and you still got 15 to work with somewhere else, and nobody's gonna come attack you. Nobody's gonna go and throw themselves into 10 forces, especially if you've got good cards on your side, or even a good alliance ability like the Voice or the Prescience. So, and I know it's easy to say, it's simple to win to win the game, just have the best board state. But it is something that you want to keep an eye on, and you always want to measure how much you support your ally. And I think honestly, it's a really thematic and faithful kind of consequence of Dune, especially when you look at what the Harkonnen were planning. They wanted to use the Emperor's help for what they wanted, and then later on, overthrow them to get what they wanted and not what the Emperor wants. So, neat little thing there. I always love pointing out lore consistencies between the game and the books, and even the movies when they show up. And it's pretty frequent that they show up. But yeah, golden rule of the Emperor: be very measured in how much you support your ally, because I think it's honestly, I don't have the numbers on this. It would be interesting to see, but I feel like it's very common that the player who wins the game has a good chance of receiving some help from the Emperor at some point in time. It's just such a good ability to kickstart your position in the game, because at the end of the day, cards are one of the most expensive things in Dune, and it defines whether or not you win. You need good cards to win. And if the major barrier to getting those, which is the money, is removed, then you're going to have a very easy time winning, which is why the Emperor is so strong and why they're such a sought after ally, because they solve a lot of people's problems. The BG, their problem is they need money. That's why they get those advisors shipped in for free. Atreides, their problem is they need money. That's why they sell card info. If Atreides had an income, you would never see them sell card info, because that's such an important piece of strength that you give away. That's why you charge for it. But yeah, with the Emperor and Atreides, they're never going to sell info on a card again, because they have all their money satisfied, and it just makes life harder for them if people are competing with them for the good cards. So be careful about your allies, keep them in check, because if anything, your allies are future enemies, and your enemies are just future allies. That's a pretty common thing in Dune, and especially with the Emperor. And another thing you want to watch out for as the Emperor is your exposure to risk. Now, of course, because of all that money you have, you are going to have the easiest time of almost any faction coming back from a bad defeat. But it is going to set you back in terms of momentum. Because the Emperor's main ability is money, directly translating that into a good board state is all you need to know to see how strong the Emperor is at that stage of the game. If the Emperor has a lot of forces in the tanks, then they're not in a great position. It's very obvious to see. It doesn't matter a great deal how many cards they have or how good they are. Of course, having good cards means that you will eventually come back just from reviving your forces. But if you don't have a good board state as the Emperor, you're just straight up not going to win. And there isn't really a way to leverage that position into win except by recovering and getting forces back on the board. Like the guild, they don't need a lot of presence on the board to get wins because of their ability to ship at any time, and they have that cheap shipment and whatnot. But the Emperor, having a good board state is very important. That's all they have. They don't have voice where they win battles easier. They don't have knowledge on who has what cards to be able to pick fights easier. It's just spice, and spice translates into board state. And an issue with this is making sure that when you're on the planet, you're in a position where you probably won't get attacked. The reason why I said that as Emperor, it's actually good that you don't start with any forces on the board is because of this very reason. For most factions, um, you want forces on the board because it's basically money, because you don't have to pay to ship them in. And it also allows you to use those forces to go and collect spice. You know, the Atreides and Harkonnen, they start in these cities. That's a big component of their starting strength is that they have a lot of forces on the board, and they're in a city with ornithopters so that they can move them out to spice blows or ship somewhere else and move to spice blows. The Fremen, a lot of their starting strategy with where they place their forces is related to getting spice. You know, a very common place to put a lot of forces in is False Wall South because it means that with those forces there and the ones you can ship into their free zone, only Sea Higher Ridge is inaccessible to them. So your ability to get spice is a great part of starting forces on the board. With the Emperor, they don't need to go out and collect spice, which means that they not only do they not need forces on the board, they do not want them because they don't want them to be in a bad position, which would be not a lot of guys there to discourage attacks, or in a place that is not easy to get to a stronghold from. Tricky thing with going for a spice route like Sea Lago South, even though it is so profitable, is that these forces need ornithopters to get to A, another stronghold, or B, even just a rock territory. Most of these spice blows on the board are adjacent to somewhere that is safe, which means that after those guys are done collecting, they can just, hide from the storm at the very least. In fact, just looking at it, I haven't looked at it before, but I'm pretty sure Sea Lago South is the only one that isn't adjacent to somewhere sheltered from the storm, so that's pretty funny. I guess Old Gap after. No, you got Rimwall. Yeah, so if you learn something new about Dune every day. Yeah, so being able to get forces back to rock territories is an importance in consideration when you're going out and collecting spice. Emperor, that's not a problem for them. They don't need to worry about that because they don't want to collect spice. And they don't have, I'm rambling here, they don't want to expose themselves to risk because forces on the board is the only place you can get attacked in the parts that hurt. Your leader pool and your cards. Losing cards and losing leaders are difficult to get back, and it's a huge deal, and it's a huge malice on you that's going to make it difficult to win games. For most factions, if you lose cards, you need to buy them back, and it's expensive, and you might not have the income to do so, which means it's a big setback. Losing leaders, you straight up basically can't do until you lose all of them, which is a bad problem, or you get the 1 in 50 card that lets you revive them, or there's a Tleilaxu in the game. And of course, those are things you can only lose in battles, and you can only have battles if you're on the board. And modification of that, you can only have battles if you're on the board and somebody comes and fights you, which means that as the Emperor, all that to say, as the Emperor, if you're on the board, make sure you're there with a lot of guys. You know, that's why I like my opening move to be 5 normals and 2 Sardaukar, because that is 9 strength. That's tough to crack open. Not a lot of people are going to do it, and it's also not a huge portion of your reserves. So it's conservative, yet still very strong. And it's important that if you do get attacked and you do have like only 3 or 4 guys left over, it's important to ship people down the next turn so that it's strong again, or move those guys to somewhere safe like the Polar Sink or somewhere people aren't going to contest, like a rock territory. People usually won't come fight you if you're just sitting in a random rock territory, unless they're evil and they want to hurt you, or they're like a Harkonnen that wants to capture leaders and stuff like that, or go kill people for spice. Another thing, as the Emperor, is gonna relate to how you disperse your Sardaukar. So because they can only be revived, only one can be revived per turn, no matter what, no breaking that limit. It means that I like to try to disperse them around the board and have 1 or 2 in every stack of forces. I basically always ship out at least 1 Sardaukar with any group of forces because this means 2 things. Because you can only revive 1 per turn, it's always best if you are reviving a Sardaukar every turn if you have forces dead, just because it reduces the ability to be bottlenecked. Other thing it means is that if you do have, say, 5 Sardaukar in one place and they all get wiped out, that's going to take a way longer time to revive than if you had 8 normal forces and 1 Sardaukar there, which is the same strength. That's both 10 strength. But that you're going to be able to revive very easily in 3 turns, 3 per turn. Then if you had 5 Sardaukar and they all died, now you can only get 1 per turn because of that rule, even if you had the spice and desire to revive them. So always ship a Sardaukar, and if you're reviving, always revive a Sardaukar and some normal forces. Disperse them. The other thing that does is it makes you less susceptible to things that will cancel them out, like the Fremen and like a Karama. As the Emperor, a big strength you have is that you don't have an obvious Karamable ability that will screw you over. You know, the BG, they could go out and have a big fight, and if somebody Karama's voice, they could be completely screwed. That could be going from a certain win to a certain loss. The Emperor, if you're careful, doesn't really have that. If you go in somewhere with 5 Sardaukar, not typically advised, you can be Karamid, and that's going to have your strength, which means you might go from, like I said, a certain win to a certain defeat. But you can very easily mitigate that by only using a couple Sardaukar in each battle. That takes it down from a difference of like, maybe 2 strength or 1 strength if Sardaukar get Karamed, and that's only in the case where you'd have to max dial. That's going to mean that Karaming Sardaukar doesn't really do as much unless it's a very close battle. And same thing goes for the Fremen fighting you. It just means that you're not going to get that ability. It's the same thing as a Karama. And yes, with respect to getting Karamat, you might say the income, you don't frequently see that happening. And if you do, it's usually because the Emperor is subsidizing their ally too much. They're like saying, hey, here's bid 10 on this card and buy it, and I'll give you the spice. If somebody Karama's Emperor's income, that means that the Emperor has to probably subsidize all of that, which means they're not going to get that income. It's going to go to the bank, and they just lose a big chunk of spice, which is, again, as always, their main strength. Now, one thing about the bidding phase that I forgot to mention is try to never let yourself be full. There's a very common strategy when the Emperor is full, where everyone agrees to bid 1 on each card, and then first person gets the card for 1 spice, the next person gets a card for 1 spice. Everyone gets basically an almost free card, and the Emperor can typically net something like 15 spice, maybe ballparking it in a turn just from that bidding income. That takes it all the way down to 5, which is awful. So try to never be full, and especially it's always good to let your ally have a slot open, because if a card you're pretty sure is good goes out on sale, it means that you can subsidize your ally for it, and you bribe them the money, and then you get it back. Not bribe it, gift it, and then it's free. You don't get any money off of it, but you also don't have to spend anything. And that's also an important consideration. That's the thing with the Emperor, is there's such a strong faction that a lot of their strategy comes down to avoiding avoiding traps as much as it is taking advantage of their abilities. Just having so much spice means it's very easy for you to fall into traps because you're recklessly spending. An issue with supporting your ally too much, in addition to them getting stronger than you and leaving you, is also the fact that you're not collecting any income off of that card. Yes, it's a free card, but it's not going to you, it's going to your ally, so it's benefiting them. And if you win with that alliance, it's benefiting your alliance, but they might leave. You're not getting spice for that card, which means you're kind of nullifying your ability to help your ally. And if you do that too much, you might run too low on spice and lose your main advantage as the Emperor. And not only that, but lose your intimidation factor. If you do that too early on in the game where people can sort of track how much spice you have, they might know that you don't have a lot of spice, and that big hammer that you get to swing around, it disappears because now everyone knows that you don't have the spice required to ship a bunch of guys and dial them and kill somebody if you wanted to. So it deflates your power a little bit. Another reason why you don't want to subsidize your ally too much. I think I'm getting through all of the things you want to avoid. So I guess we'll just talk about the last few things I haven't mentioned, which is their leader pool. It's excellent. They have a great leader pool. I think it's the second best in the game behind the Fremens. Great thing is you have a 6 strength leader. Not every faction has that, especially when you start looking at the expansions. You have a good low strength leader for chucking out in throne fights and limiting the amount of spice your opponent gets when they kill your leader. And they also have a very good gap. They've only got a gap of 1 between their strongest and their second strongest, which means that if somebody has Hazimir Friendliness Trader and you want to avoid playing them all game, your next strongest is Captain Aramsham, who's a 5. That's a difference of 1. So a trader on your highest leader is only a reduction in your leader strength by 1 point, which is a complicated subject, but basically, if you look at the Harkonnen, where they have a 6 and their next highest is 4, if your 6th is killed or you know that they're a traitor somehow, they're a truth trance, that means your score is reduced by 2 whole points instead of only 1 in this case. And it also means that there's no obvious traitor to pick. Again, in the case of Harkonnen, Fade is a great traitor to pick, not only because he's their highest strength leader, but because he's their highest by so much. A counter example of this is the Atreides. They're frequently not picked for traitors because of their Kwisatz Haderach ability, but also because of the fact that they have 2 highest leader strengths instead of 1. So even if you pick their highest strength leader, there's a 50-50 chance they play the other one. The other thing to mention is their Karama ability, their once per game Karama ability, and it's similarly mundane on the surface, but pretty good under the hood, and that is you can use it to revive one of your leaders for free or 3 forces for free. That sounds like a downgraded version of the Gola ability, which it is, because it's only 3 forces instead of 5, and it doesn't even work on Sardaukar. There's still a limit of 1 per turn. But the Gola card is actually good if you need it. If you have a leader dead that you want back, you can use it on them. If you don't have a leader dead yet, you can play more reckless with them because you know you'll be able to revive them. And oftentimes, as the Emperor, if you did get a Gola, you probably would want to walk it into a battle and get somebody killed and then revive them, especially if you can get a bit of spice from that because you win it, just to free up your hand to be able to keep bidding and forming that perfect hand. So it's not great, but there's also a lot of Kurama abilities that are worse, like the Fremens, which is just call a worm, not super useful, and the Atreides, which is reveal their entire battle plan, which sounds good on paper, but oftentimes, if you're in a good position as Atreides, you already know what they're going to play anyways, so it's not super useful. I think this is all there is to really say about the Emperor. They're a very complicated and deep faction, and I've even thought about breaking down my strategies in one of the games, and I find Emperor is my best faction, so that would be the best game to do that on. And if you have any interesting strategies you use when you play as the Emperor, or any questions or anything whatsoever, definitely uh, leave a comment about that. I'm always happy to answer stuff about that and talk about, my favorite aspects of Dune. And a favorite faction is definitely high up on that list. So, enough rambling. I've done 44 minutes and 17 seconds of that. So, I'm going to leave it there. That is the Emperor. That's their strengths and strategies. Let me know, any interesting things you like to do with the Emperor or interesting things you've seen done, interesting ways you've seen them played at your table. Because honestly, I kind of I didn't rate them super highly because they seem very boring on paper. But somebody I know who's very good at the game and very familiar with it said that Emperor is the most broken faction in the game because of that bidding ability, the ability to get so much spice. And oh, Okay, damn it. One more thing before I end is their impact on a game with lots of economy factions in the game, like Emperor, like Guild, like Chome, and like BT, who add spice to the economy of the game and can inflate the things that have variable pricing, like cards and like common deals, like a tradie selling info or a throne fight. And bidding on cards, it's not a fixed price like reviving forces and shipping is, which means it fluctuates based on how rich or poor the game is. If you have a very poor table, you're the only economy faction in the game, the card prices will be far lower, but that doesn't matter for you as much because you will be poor, but everyone will be poorer. So you still maintain your advantage as the richest player in the game. If it's a very inflated table, it gets very interesting because people will frequently be paying upwards of even 10 spice on cards they do not have any information on, which means that you, as the Emperor, you're still the richest player by far. But you also can do more of those actions that are fixed in price, like reviving forces, like shipping forces and dialing them, which further buffs your ability to just throw down a doom stack. Because in a game where you're the richest and you have 20 spice, is a very different situation than a game where you're the richest and you have 50 spice, because it means you could ship and dial all of your reserves if you needed to, but you couldn't really do that comfortably in a game where you're the richest and you only have 20 spice. The flip side of that is that once you get later into the game, where the majority of forces on the board are forces that people have shipped and paid to ship rather than forces they spawned with, like Atreides and Harkonnen and Moritania and Ikaz, that means that everyone will be poorer and as a result have less forces on the board. So the fact that you can only ship fewer forces, it all evens out in the end, is basically what I'm saying. But it is an important thing to note that as Emperor, the number of economy factions in the game will seriously impact how much spice you get, even more so than the guild, and way more so than the Tleilaxu and the Chome, whose income is a little bit more fixed. That is all I'm going to say on the Emperor. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making it this far and listening to my hopefully mostly coherent ramblings. If you have any comments about this, obviously put them in the comment section. And let me know what other sorts of videos you'd like to see in the future. I've been slacking a little bit lately. I'm sorry about that. But if you've got any interesting video ideas, that is always a great motivator for me to get off my hind and record some videos. So that's going to do it. Uh, have a good day. Catch y'all later.